And we are back from the break with more in our conversation with special guest Michael Eisenberg, a venture capitalist and the author of the new book, The Tree of Life and Prosperity, which is performing incredibly well on Amazon in the business and ethics space. Thanks again for coming on. And I want to get to, I guess let's just start in the Garden of Eden, because there's so many examples of biblical stories that are reflective of business and the moral realities, ethical realities, and non-realities we're dealing with today. So it starts in the Garden of Eden. Explain.
So, amazingly, when you look at the Garden of Eden, we think of this as some idyllic place. And it's not, actually. Why do we know it's not? Because Adam and Eve have no children in the Garden of Eden. Children are only born once they're outside the Garden of Eden. And when I look at the story of the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve, what I see is the same modern proposition being made today recently by Ilhan Omar and Elon Musk, people as disparate as that, saying we need to provide universal basic income to people. Universal basic income is an idea around for generations where if we just give people subsistent incomes, they will do amazing things. Well, in my view, the Garden of Eden proves that people don't do amazing things when everything is provided for them or their basic sustenance is. God grows all the trees there and it provides basic sustenance. Only when man is expelled from the Garden of Eden because they're so bored that Eve is talking to the serpent does man begin to work hard. And when he begins to work hard, he creates bread. From the sweat of his brow, he creates bread. He makes something. And only when he makes bread and battles with the thorns and thistles does he have children and create a new generation. Man needs work not just to earn a living, but to be productive and feel productive. And there's no bigger productivity and creativity than having children. So children only exist outside the Garden of Eden. And if we needed proof of this, by the way, COVID's proven it. Because we gave out checks to people and said, they'll come back to work. They don't come back to work when you give them checks. And so we had a living proof of the Garden of Eden. And I realize it's been tough psychologically. It was lonely in the Garden of Eden too, which is why Eve speaks to the serpent. She's lonely. They got nothing to do together. And so this, I think, an important lesson is super applicable to modern times. This idea of universal basic, it's just a bad idea.
Yeah. Well, even in Kabbalah, it's a saying, bread of shame. When you're giving something to somebody for free without earning it, in a way, there's a resentment that builds up. And it's interesting, just getting back from the United States, that's the biggest thing I noticed is restaurants, there's not a lot of employees. People are not going back to work, which doesn't help the economy as a whole.
No, absolutely not.
Wow.
You need people to work.
Yeah, and let's talk about, you use an example of the Tower of Babel being, technology being connected to the Tower of Babel. Explain.
So in the introduction to the book, I look at the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel, we understand it as the place where God scattered the people. What we forget is the first part of the story, which is that everyone gathers in a valley to make for themselves a name, and there's one language and one platform for creativity, the tower. And this is a collection of humanity in one place, and it doesn't lead to any good. And God walks in and says, we better scatter these people. He actually doesn't destroy the tower. He scatters the people and confuses or scatters their tongues.
Babel in Hebrew is to confuse.
Exactly. And so we think about tech platforms today. These have also become places where you can constrain free speech and constrain difference. So we have a big challenge of deplatforming now, which is certain voices are being deplatformed, taken off platforms like Facebook or Google, et cetera. Yeah.
Amazon
has banned some books. And so we can't have this. And so what we need to do is scatter this. The best way to scatter it, if building a tower were the tools of the Tower of Babel, the current tower is data. And so we need to give people back their data, their language, what they own, and scatter social profiles around so people can make them portable and take them to where they want so they don't run a risk of being deplatformed.
Wow, very interesting. And let's talk about Noah, another powerful, important lesson. And, we knew he became a drunkard and made vineyards after, but, creating the plow, that's not learned in everyday Hebrew school.
Yeah, actually, most people don't even remember that he got drunk, too. They think of Noah as the guy who built the ark and saved humanity. But the kind of bookending stories of Noah is that there was a generation. There was a Thomas Malthus. For those who don't know, Thomas Malthus was an Anglican priest who said the world is coming to an end. We have no food to feed people. This is a couple hundred years ago. We're still around, right? So the world gets better, but there are always doomsayers. Maureen Dowd has become like a doomsayer about climate change, et cetera. But what happens is there's always some younger generation that comes along and invents something to improve output. So Thomas Malthus of Noah's time was Jared 5 generations earlier, said, stop having kids. There's no food. And then Noah invents the plow. And after Noah, humanity explodes in a positive sense. People start having children. But with that abundance comes corruption. And so the challenge the Bible is presenting is innovation is great. The plow is great and abundance is great. But how we handle it ethically, principally, is a big challenge. The same is true of the drunken story of Noah. Noah leaves the ark and he invents fermentation. He plants a vineyard and makes wine. Now, wine is the water of the ancients because it was clean, it had alcohol. And Noah invents this amazing thing for humanity. Clean water, that's wine. And it could be used to gladden the heart, but instead he uses it to drink himself to a drunken stupor, and he's abused by his son Ham. And so the lesson of Noah is innovation is great. It increases abundance. It saves humanity. It propels it forward. But it doesn't have timeless principles. It goes wayward. And the same is true of artificial intelligence, and the same is true of synthetic biology, and the same is true of autonomous vehicles. We have innovation at a pace we've never had before. But if we don't put timeless principles alongside of it, it can go awry.
Congratulations on all of the success. You're going to be helping a lot of people.
Thank you, Emily. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Now
And
make all 8
this is
kids
your
read
copy.
it. Thank you. I'm going to read it. Amazing.